So I already reacted to this video before, but I only reacted to like 30 seconds of it. And a lot of you actually liked the person that was on the video. So I think I should react to the entire thing instead of just a piece of it.
Luscious. Thank you for that. Very interesting guest today, Shaka Almos. And he is a research specialist in ancient Egyptian history. He is also the founder of the Nile Valley Movement. Shaka, thank you for coming on. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. It's an honor and a privilege, and I mean that genuinely and authentically.
Thank you, brother. I totally appreciate that. The Nile Valley Movement. So you're walking down the road one day, and a red apple fell from the tree.
Okay.
And you thought, let me do the Nile Valley Movement. What is the Nile Valley Movement exactly?
Well,
So let me emphasize that I just watched this guy's videos before where he debated people from all sections of the African centered type of debates. I know nothing about his movements and I know nothing about his pure core elements, but his knowledge on Egypt and Africa in general, which is something that a lot of people who are put in the quote unquote Afrocentric camp are accused of ignoring, which you can see a lot of them have full knowledge of the rest of Africa. But his knowledge of the others also is there. Now, I do know that there are some people who focus solely on Egypt, but there's nothing wrong with that, as that would just be called a specialist.
The red apple scenario that you used has put me in an Isaac Newton mood. So, let's talk about the gravity, if you will, of the Nile Valley Movement as briefly as possibly
Yes.
be done. The Nile Valley Movement was born out of a concern of my own, because of my own unique cultural background. It was born out of a concern of maintaining and perpetuating, advancing and preserving a Black image of Nile Valley civilization.
Well, that's an honorable thing. By the way, I'm not being paid by anybody to endorse anything. I'm not endorsing anything. I'm not promoting anything. I'm just watching the video.
Not limited to, but particularly ancient Egypt. And so initially it was basically just designed to advance media that would do that, because we don't often see, actually virtually never do we see that authentic Black image of ancient Egypt. It unfortunately is, to use a colloquial term, it's whitewashed in media. And so what you get is a false image of what ancient Egypt would have actually looked like.
Now, I would add that there needs to be a little bit of an extra part of that to say that we need to portray the ancient Egyptians how they portrayed themselves. Even if you make something like animation, if you make something like portray them the way they portrayed themselves, even if you don't want to come with any bias, if you want to say we don't know what the ancient Egyptians look like, if you want to start with that, but start with at least the way they portray themselves. Make them as dark as they portray themselves. You can make the woman yellow sometimes, since that's what they did as well. But the portrayals that we've been getting for years and years is opposite of the real one. And there's a reason why there's a complaint about it outside of just, looking back in history, which is portray them how they portray themselves. And then we can talk about whether or not their race is Negroid as today. But first, portray them exactly as you see them on the statues. In fact, trace them. And of course, I remember the movie The Prince of Egypt, which they did portray them as Black, but they tried to leave a little bit of space so that you can portray yourself. They didn't just sit there and say they're Black. They just drew them exactly how the people look like. And then most people just go into, oh, they're Black.
From a demographic perspective.
So ancient Egypt,
Yes.
was it American Black or just dark-skinned people?
They were Africans. They were Black Africans. The same people that American Blacks descend from.
So that's a rarely perceptive question by Jesse Lee Peterson, asking if is it the people that other black people come from, or is it just people who happen to be very dark skinned? And again, the reason why even this one is something that I can sort of go with is because if you say that, it's going to sound ridiculous to the general population. Like, what other, if you look today, right, and you look around the Middle East, you will not find people as dark as the ones that are portrayed in Egypt, and also the hair and everything that happens, the broad noses and stuff. So again, just portray them as they are and see if the general public thinks that. And that is the second thing that he talked. That's the thing that he talked about. Also, he used to do debates on YouTube a lot back in the day, and I think he's actually back right now doing videos still on YouTube. Maybe not debates, but videos. And one of the things I think you notice quickly when you talk about education of any kind, it's really not just this, because I've watched a lot of different education channels, and I mean universities and stuff like that, not just YouTubers. And something you'll notice is because the content is so dry, they're stuck at about the same views that I get. And you need some level of entertainment in order to capture people.
And what is your proof that American blacks descended from ancient Egypt or
Well, the
Egyptian?
claim,
Well, that's easy, DNA. So obviously, it's not necessarily directly 100%, just like how not every South African is Zulu, and not every person who today calls himself a Zulu person would have had a warrior actually fight in the Shaka Zulu Wars. So, there's a bit of a thing there. Just history is mythologized in that way. But yes, let's read here. This is from AI. Yes, West African DNA has been found in ancient Egypt, particularly in Y chromosomes lineage, E1B1A, found in pharaohs like Ramses III and his descendants, which is common in modern West and Central African populations. This indicates a historical genetic connection between ancient Egypt and sub Saharan Africans. However, studies of the ancient Egyptians have also shown genetic links to the Levant and Anatolia. So this is just the honest what most what you call that, what most geneticists have found, no, what geneticists have found today. By the way, there's something very important about this DNA because it's not necessarily linked to East Africa, especially the one of Ramses III. It's mainly linked to West Africa, West and Central Africa, as you can see. That is of something very important, especially since North Africa has a lot of West African DNA that's been found in ancient times.
the claim is not that American blacks descend from ancient Egypt. The claim is that, or the fact actually is that ancient Egypt was an African civilization, and it was no less African than any other African civilization uh, that would have existed in antiquity in Africa, whether it was West Africa, East Africa, or South Africa. The way we see,
So keep in mind, at this point, this is where a lot of people will start to point out the Levant element, or even the Mediterranean, or whatever you want to call it, element. And again, they will not stop at continent, right? They won't stop there. They want to pretend that that's where they want to stop. They want to be like, hey guys, race doesn't matter. You guys should really focus more on just things that have to do with Africa. It's like, okay, well, even if every single one of the Egyptians were blonde with blue eyes, that would still trap them within Africa, and there would be an Africa concern. And if everyone should be concerned with their own thing, then you guys be concerned with Europe and we'll be concerned with Egypt. And then they go, wait a minute, no, that's European history. And it's like, okay, stop pretending like you don't care that it's the race part of it that matters. It does matter. And the fact that they've already found genes of Africans tells you already that we're dealing with a true African civilization. And of course, you can find Black African DNA in the Middle East. You can find white people's DNA in the Middle East. You can find white people DNA in Europe. You can find Black people DNA in Europe. You can find Black people DNA in East Asia, Indonesia, the Americas, all of those places. But it does not take away from those civilizations being American, or take away from those civilizations being European, or take away from them being Asian. It's only when it comes to Africa that it switches, and all of a sudden it's no longer an African civilization. But again, this is something people have been debating for at least 100 years. So, I don't expect people to crumble right now and be like, oh, we give up. It was an African civilization.
Africa today, those were not the demographics in Africa in ancient times. And so the claim is not that African Americans descend from ancient Egypt, but if you need that connection, if you need a Nile Valley connection to West Africans, then I would suggest that you brush up on the migratory history of ancient Africa. People often think of Africa or ancient Africans as being very static, all localized in one place, without taking into account the documentation that clearly establishes that there were Nile Valley migrations to West Africa.
So I did already comment on this part, but I'm not going to skip it. I'm just going to comment on it as if it's my first time. It's only about 10 minutes of which he speaks, where I give commentary, and also it's going to be a little bit different. Now, this is the important part, the migratory patterns part, which is West Africans, as I've talked about in my book, Songhai, all of those people are truly related to the people in the Nile, the Sudanese people.
Particularly after the Roman incursion into North Africa. Many of the Blacks in North Africa left North Africa and they migrated into the inner body of Africa. And that includes West Africa, not just West Africa, but unfortunately, the way people are miseducated today, they're under the false impression that the Sahara was empty and that
So an important point, not something we've never talked about before, but let's start with the Sahara thing. So of course the Sahara was not empty. There's people who went up and down the Sahara, and we can find the genetics on either side, both ways. But I think another thing to be said is, if you look at the Sudanese population, their genes have rarely been found yet in ancient Egypt, even though we know it was the most common. We find West African DNA, which was probably less common than the Nubian DNA. Maybe, I don't know. I actually have no idea, but I'm guessing that's the case. But the fact that it has been found tells you about how, just because you find DNA does not mean you're finding the most typical. So when you find Middle Eastern DNA, they're making the case that it's the most typical DNA. We found Middle Eastern DNA, therefore it's the most typical DNA in Egypt. It's like, again, you're still talking about thousands of years of transfer. You have no idea if though that Middle Eastern DNA is coming from an outside clan. You just think that it doesn't. And we've got proof that people who were outsiders cosplayed or, took on the roles of the Egyptians.
Only people in the Sahara were light-skinned, miscegenated North Africans, and that's false. If you ever want to, I would just suggest that you Google the term Kanem Bornu, Kanem, Kanem Bornu, Bornu, the Kanem Bornu state. It was a Black African civilization.
I'm going to keep it short because we already talk about the civilization, which is probably one of the greatest civilizations on earth that is never talked about.
And it basically comprised all of the Sahara from the north to the south of it, and was directly adjacent to Egypt. If you spit in Kanem Bornu, it would land in Egypt. So what people tend to do.
So what he means about that is that these people, the Kanem Bornu people, are related to nearby neighbors of Egypt, very close. So Garamantes is one of them. The other ones are the Libyans, probably some of the Libyan tribes. The other one is Nubians. So those type of tribes, and then of course the South civilization and everything like that. And those people are right at the border of the country that we call Egypt today. And we know they had migratory patterns that went in and out of Egypt.
Through modern Western politics, to give it a nice name, they create this imaginary boundary, and they use these imaginary Eurocentric terms like sub-Saharan Africa, and these are very modern ideas. They don't.
Yeah, that word sub-Saharan African is a very bad one. And again, I saw in my one of my comments, someone said subarctic, and you can tell by using the word sub in a lot of words that you get the sense that there's a degradation about it. Just like when you look at if you look at other parts of the world, they don't really break it down like that, except if it's necessary at the most highest point. For example, Asian DNA has to be broken up because we're talking about three different peoples. We could be talking about South Asians, which that is very important. But notice how it's not sub whatever, it's South Asians. And then you have East Asians, another different area of genetics. Then you have Middle Easterners or Eurasians. And then you have, Pacific Islanders and stuff like that. But the way that they're portrayed in genetic studies, it's never sub-Saharan Africa, which again, that DNA should not even be considered African. That DNA should be considered Middle Eastern DNA. To make sure no one understands me, I'm talking about the Middle Eastern DNA that's at the top today in present times, that it should be considered. I don't care how far away it came in. If you want to separate it from Africa, if you want to separate anything from an African location, that DNA should just be considered Middle Eastern DNA.
Applied to antiquity or ancient Africa. So not only were there successive migrations from Egypt into the inner body of Africa that eventually culminated in a West African locale, but they actually know the roots. They literally know the roots and the stopping points that they took, and these are documented.
Who knows this?
Who knows this?
Yeah.
So he's about to name specific people, but really it's something that has been studied by historians from around the world, and the migratory patterns from North Africa and the Southern Africa is something that is well known. And then you have to give up the fact that from the time of written language, as soon as they start writing about North Africa, they start writing about the South. And this includes Egypt, for example, that writes about southern lands. We don't know exactly where they stopped, but they do keep going south. So that's proof that the South was connected to the North, and they go southeast as well as southwest. So, and we don't know some of these territories where they go southwest. There's a map that I showed you guys where they just plot land. And again, I said I know exactly where they got that information from. This is the map, by the way. And again, I know where they got this from, and it's not all the way correct. Punt is definitely not that high up. And then we can get into the other ones. The Medjay is not strictly in this area right here, but we'll get back to that again. So over here, what you have is the common names used for Nubian locations, and they're sort of put generally in the area that would be considered Nubian areas. But again, they put it very low for very, I would say, political reasons. But the fact that the Egyptians themselves have gone so low that they even give names to these specific parts, and then they go further and give names to other parts in the West, but we don't know where. I have to reread those parts again. We don't know where they go, but they go west, and they go and find other locations where they contact pygmies and stuff like that. Unfortunately, they didn't leave maps in the way that later people would leave maps. And unfortunately, there was obviously maps in Egypt, but unfortunately, they didn't leave documentation that is so easy to understand, because I don't think they were concerned with someone retaking the journey to those areas. Now maybe they were, and they understood each other better, but
People who study history, people who study migratory history of ancient of various continents, but particularly Africa. So if you study, so I'll give you, if you want a text to read, a good book to
Yeah, give
read.
me a short because this is
Okay,
so
yeah.
much it's making my head hurt.
Okay, no, no problem.
And
I'll give you.
I'm black and slow, so I totally don't understand any of what you
Well,
just
hey, don't
said.
worry about it. I'm black and 3 times as slow. So, that's why I told a friend of mine the other day, I was like, oh, hell yeah, I could definitely learn from Jesse Peterson. I learn from anyone.
Yeah.
so while they go off about that, I want you to remember that the leader of whatever the Egyptian studies at the time, Zahi Hawass, had said that they were black, but they were not Negro, giving up the fact that they're black. So it's always funny when we see some other people who are like, well, they can't be black. It's like the people studying it outside, even the ones who don't think that they're Negroes, believe that the ancient Egyptians were black.
You know what I'm saying? So, the text to read is a book called Exiled Egyptians, Heart of Africa. Now, the key thing that you need to know about this book, where it talks about these migrations, and it's not the only text, but it happens to be my favorite text that highlights these migrations. The thing that's important to remember about that text is that it's not written by a black person. So it's not a black person that's cheerleading migrations out of the Nile Valley into West Africa.
Now, unfortunately, he has to do this because, well, basically, we all have to do this in order to add validity because people don't trust black people when it comes to studies regarding Egypt. And so you have to point to a European person or whatever, Asian, who then says the information from a non African, well, an African point of view, but the person mustn't be black themselves. Otherwise, people are going to claim you're biased because in their head, caring about Africa and you're black is biased. But all these other Europeans who are doing European studies, we can't go, okay, give me someone who's not European to prove that the Romans had this or they had that. But when it comes to Africa, they have to make sure that the person is not black, which is why he's saying what he's saying right now, which is very unfortunate.
It's actually written by a modern Egyptian national by the name of Mustafa Gadala, who graduated from Cairo University, born and raised in Egypt. So this is not ethnic cheerleading or some imaginary ethnic cheerleading being promulgated by African Americans. So this is literally from a modern Egyptian national who is promulgating this. And then you have other people who were born and raised in Egypt that also have written literature. Robert Bouval is.
So previously, when I talked about this part of it, I brought up a female Egyptologist. I can't find the video right now, but she also talked about that. And they also talked about the later probable mixing of the blood, which is where most of the DNA studies are done. And then they go, oh, see, they were definitely, because remember, there's 3 opinions that come from the quote unquote Afrocentric point of view. And it's that the black Africans started the civilization. The second one is that the black people were the civilization till a very late date. And then the third one is that they were at least a part of the civilization. And they go out of their way to ignore that information.
Is another one.
Let me ask you this.
Sure.
Let me ask you this. Black people in America, at least, don't normally read. They don't research. They're just, and not all, but most, right? They are followers and not individuals. And so they don't research for themselves. Knowing all what you just said,
Yes.
How you expect to get that information into them when they don't even care about that kind of stuff?
So obviously he's incorrect about African Americans not reading or writing or any of that, especially in the era of the internet where almost everyone is forced to look at words all day. But the other way to get to it is through entertainment.
Because it's so much, and they're definitely not going to read unless you put it on TV and make it a comedy or something. They're not gonna even pay attention to it. So how black people don't read all that? They don't feel like even thinking about that. How you expect to help them when they don't care? They don't research.
Okay, so what I try to do is I try my best to not cater to or subscribe to tropes. I think
You said
uh,
tropes?
tropes,
Stereotypes, in other words, things like that that force people down a hole.
caricatures of people that stereotype, right?
Oh,
And I think because when we do that, we're missing an opportunity to actually accomplish what you just finished talking about, which is getting the information to the people. Uh, a large part of it, a large part of it has to do with there's so many things. It's a very there are very complex reasons why black people are the way that they are, but or the way that we are. I try to I try to be careful with my pronouns, you know. Yeah, I really
Yeah, so we don't need to repeat too badly about what the reason is for these type of things existing in certain black communities. Of course, the history is there to be documented, but obviously, something another thing I've been thinking about is that Muslim nations in the past used to over require people, even artisans, because they sort of forbid the portrayal of physical figures. That's why a lot of Islamic civilizations you don't find physical figures of men, and in some cases they're not as strict. They allow you to make physical figures, but just not of religious people. And because of that, literacy went up, 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 and that's something we never think about. That in places like Africa, literacy rates were very high.
do. So because people be like, "Why are you talking about they? You're one of us," and I
I
am.
know.
So and
I hear that a
I'm
lot.
conscious of yeah. But you know something, and
They
it's
want you to
something.
be a part of the mess.
Well, you know what? We are a part of the mess, and I think that
I'm not a
we
part of the mess. I used to
actually
be
you
a part.
are. Actually, no, you are a part of the mess. I'm going to share something with you. By separating ourselves, what we end up doing is we end up taking an elitist attitude towards our own people.
But that's not
And
how I think, though. I just think the blacks are messed up.
So you can see why I cut the video off at this point last time. But we're all adults. We can take some of these as long as we are allowed to give back what is thrown at us.
Because they're so brainwashed and demoralized and brainwashed and government control, people control. They just don't know what they're doing. And at one time, I believed in the so-called the lies from the civil rights movement, so-called
right,
civil. And so I know what it is to be brainwashed like that, but I
right,
overcame it. And most
right.
black people would never overcome it.
So of course everything he said there was nonsense. Actually, it reminds me of the video I made about Modi Speaks, where she was talking about how good the civil rights movement is, and it also reminds me how weird some of these people are. Like they've got a line. Not all of them will go to hell and back to uh throw black people under the bus, but Jesse Lee Peterson will throw them under the bus. He says worse things than what he's saying right now. But that Modi Speaks girl, at least she sort of pulled back on the civil rights thing.
I don't know.
So
See, here
that's
you
why
go
I
again
don't
with
know
this
how
thing.
you're going to
No,
help them with all this information, man.
I don't know. I sometimes wonder what kind of company you keep and where you go because the majority of the black people that I know, believe it or not, they are extremely educated. I mean, extremely. They're neurosurgeons.
But they
They're
are dumber than the
attorneys.
non-educated people.
So here you hear Jesse Lee Peterson saying they're dumber than the non-educated people, which the reason why he's saying that, there's actually a reason, is because there's a section of the Republican Party that believes that university or college is a waste of money, although like they will send their kids to those colleges, which they try to spin that whole like, oh, it's a waste of money, and then they'll send their kids to get educated that way. But they try to spin that, and that's the part where now he's struggling because he's like, oh, they're not educated, but then he has to say actually it doesn't matter that they haven't got a college degree.
The educated black people that
Yeah,
you're talking about.
yeah.
I wouldn't say that they were dumber than the non-educated black people. I would say that they have their own particular set of issues and challenges, but then everyone does. I
Yeah.
mean, there are as many white people who are messed up as there are black people.
You think
I
so?
think what
Well, in America, there's more. There's definitely way more in America in terms of people who are of the Caucasian race who are like percentage wise. It's just it's no comparison. And of course, number wise, there's no comparison either.
Oh, no question about it. In fact, there are more white people that are messed up than black people.
The only thing I
simply
see wrong
because
with white people is that they're weak. They're afraid to be honest with the black folks and tell them the truth to free them up, free the blacks up. But other than
uh,
that, they seem to be okay.
Desi, they're afraid to be honest, not just with black people, they're afraid to be honest with themselves. So this is what I mean about everybody's messed up. I don't pick and choose. I'm an equal opportunity hater. I don't just dump on black people. I shit on everybody.
And as noble as that is, we have to first take something into consideration, which is most people from the world are very smart. I know there's some people who are sort of, you know, they're not as optimistic as others, and they believe most humans are actually pretty dumb, but it's not true. When human beings are given a platform or a place, a lot of the times they grab it by the horns and they turn it into something. A lot of times when you see people in devastating positions, it's because almost anybody would drown in whatever position they're in.
Black,
You
white,
do
Chinese,
what?
everybody.
Did you say S?
Oh, I'm sorry. Are we allowed? We're not allowed to use profanity.
No,
on
that's
this show,
fine.
right? It's a Christian
No,
show.
that's fine.
Oh,
No,
okay,
I just
yeah.
didn't understand what you're saying. So
Okay, yeah.
back to how all this information going to help them when
Right.
they don't really read, they don't research, they don't really care.
But why are you promulgating that? Because you don't know what people do.
Especially in the 21st century when it's so easy to find all kinds of information about anything. We know that there's been all kinds of detail and all of that all around the world.
You know, I'll give you an example. Last night I was watching an interview with some black women. I'm not particularly fans of theirs, but one of the women was a female actress by the name of Lisa Ray. She's pretty popular and well known.
Oh, I know who that
And-
is.
Right. But the thing that I was surprised is that during her video, behind her was an incredibly beautiful personal library. And because I don't know her and I've never met her, my assumption is what I see on the surface. And I have to constantly remind myself, until you know someone, you can't say what they do or don't do. So I just try not to judge people until I get to know them.
You know what's funny about what he said? It's true that you don't really know someone until you get to know them, but you never really get to know anybody. You know how many people have gone past people's expectations, even though the person know them, like they know them, even though the person knows them, they could know them through and through as far as they can tell, and the person will still shock you with what they know, with what they achieve, with how, I mean, all of us have probably known people who had way more potential than we did, and then they didn't do half the stuff that we did.
Then when I get to know them, then I can say, well, this is my assessment of them, rather than running around caricaturizing and making generalizations about many people that I don't know.
Well,
I
I'm
can't
looking
say
at their
I
action.
can't say what most black people do
I'm
or
looking
don't
at
do.
their action
Yeah.
over the last, I've been on Earth 72 years now, and over the
Right.
last 60 years or so, black people have gotten worse. They're followers and not leaders. They're beggars and takers and not workers and givers.
So, of course, I know this statement is annoying, but it's built to annoy. This is the same person who will quote a stat saying that more black people were working under Donald Trump than any other president in history. So there's an obvious contradiction there. So he obviously doesn't mean what he's saying right now. He's just trying to say the thing that, like I said, there's an audience behind all of these things. And we always have to keep that in mind.
And so I see them in action, and I also see how they're being pulled by the so-called upper blacks and the government and stuff. They're like, but anyway, I want to ask you, what has this Nile Valley movement and all the stuff you mentioned about Egypt done for you personally?
Well, just look at him. The guy's properly dressed in it, and he's literally swimming in the culture of, let's say, Egypt, more specifically than just Africa. And clearly, it sent him in directions that he never thought he. I mean, I know he's a writer. I know that he's a debater. I know that he at least had, using this call, he moved away from a certain type of business. I'm not going to put it out there. And he went into something that was more intellectual, which is the history of Africans. A lot of the time, a lot of people, when they're lost and they don't have a direction, a history, they will get into weirder stuff because, without a history, you think, without a history or a center, like something like history, you can sort of do things in a, here's the word, nihilistic point of view, where you think all actions have equal cause and effect. Whereas if you value some things more than others, then you're less likely to do things that are damaging to yourself.
Oh, that's a very good question. I wasn't even sure that you would ask me something like that. Um, well, the first thing that it did was it afforded me something that you place great value on. It afforded me uh, a different view of. It afforded me a different worldview, so that so that my mind would not be incarcerated in the mess that you speak to. And I'm not negating that that mess exists, but that's what ancient Egypt did for me, the study of it. It availed me to a wider body of knowledge. It put a lot of things on planet Earth in a historical context for me so that I could locate myself in present time and understand my relationship to everything and everything else's relationship to me.
Which, by the way, is why it's a good idea not to focus on one time period in history, because if you can do that, if you can zoom out, I think what Steve Jobs said this, if you can zoom out, a lot of people, they consider this genius, but if you can zoom out and zoom back in, it will give you a roadmap that you never even knew existed. And timeline wise, history wise, when you can place yourself on a dot and go, that's where I am. If you can make a map, imagine that we can do that even now. We can make a map of like, okay, so this was ancient Egypt, this was the later Garamantes, this was Nigeria, this was Kanem-Bornu, this was this time, then there was the slave trade, then there was, uprisings, then there was today, then it makes it way easier to see how things aren't just some straight line where you're trapped in the present. Things change. That's probably the biggest takeaway you can take from African history, more than really any other history, is that things change dramatically sometimes in very small amounts of time. People who think they're kings and that whatever they have that's sacred can never be taken away from them can have groups of people who come out of nowhere and take everything. And the wind, the fortune changes as the wind blows.
As an individual and to us as a group. I will tell you one thing that I think you would find interesting, Jesse, and I couldn't wait to talk to you about this. I said, this is going to blow his mind, probably. I said, not even blow his mind. I just want to see what his reaction is going to be. So the thing that fascinates me the most about Black America and white America is what I call the forbidden conversation, right? So people like to pretend that there's a conversation or a discourse going on between Black America and white America. There is no real conversation going on between Black America and white America.
This is an interesting take, and depending on what he means, I could agree or disagree with him. Now, obviously, I do think there's a conversation happening between Black America and white America, but I think it's actually a very toxic conversation where it leads to statements like this. It's not as open and real as what you would expect, where everybody's coming respectfully. Nobody's calling each other names. No one's trying to do any violence. No one's trying to do nothing like that, where they just sit down and they really, really, really think about things. There's stuff that's thrown out there as like food, right, for both sides to sort of munch on, while these two sides, in this case black and white, but really they do it with every group, well, these two sides basically bash into each other until one side sort of leans a little bit.
Because in order for that to happen, both sides are going to have to be very honest. And the one thing that I've discovered studying history for the 30 years that I've been studying it is that all cultures, not just some cultures or one culture, but all cultures have a very peculiar way of dealing with historical shame. All cultures, Africa, European, and Asian, they all, and others.
What it's saying here is layer number 2, which I agree with, which is once you've studied time, so history, something you have to study is geography, so geopolitics today. And when you notice how so many countries cover up their history, which is known in other parts of the world. So like Russia has got cover-ups about what they did during the Soviet Union. America's got cover-ups about what they did to native tribes and Africa and all of these things, which have been revealed in some cases, but not all of them have. Africa, of course, have got, you know, dictators that did their thing, and again, they have their cover-ups. There's also the apartheid government as well that have their cover-ups that still haven't been revealed to this day. There's bodies that are missing. You have Asia, right, in terms of Korea and stuff like that, where the Japanese did what they did with all these Asian countries and torture and stuff like that. And then you have certain places, and something that you learn quick is that people, especially if you say you're going to punish them for their sins, people are not really in the position where they're going to say, okay, I agree with you, we did do something wrong, which is why they resist so much when it comes to historical things and denying them. And then, of course, then, you know, if you take things like borders, you can see with places like China and stuff where they try to play with history. This is true for America, Russia. This is true for so many places, especially the largest countries, which are trying to swallow up smaller countries. And then, of course, you get the smaller countries trying to play this game as well, where, you know, they want to keep existing, so they start claiming parts that are not necessarily theirs.
Hispanic, doesn't matter. All cultures have a very peculiar way of dealing with shame. And it's that peculiar way of dealing with shame on a cultural and a historical level and on a racial level that keeps us from having a very honest discourse and conversation. So what makes me sad is that the real conversation will probably not be had in your lifetime, Jesse. And I'll tell you why. You know why?
Why?
Very simple reason. Because people would have to admit certain things that they don't want to admit. And I'll give you an example.
Again, if you study different histories from around the world and not just one, and again, you don't have to memorize them, you just have to study them just a little bit, you will see that no matter where you look around the world, there is all kinds of historical debate, ways of talking about things that people are still fighting over. I mean, a lot of people, they like to emphasize the Egypt debate as if it's like the only debate going around. But again, India and the Middle East are still fighting over, you know, Bharat or India. They're still fighting over, you know, the Islamic influence and Indian influence in the world, and da da da. People like to pretend that it's like one thing, it's like black or white or whatever, but people from all over the world are fighting about these things, and then they sort of zoom in on the black people and go, y'all guys are whatever. But of course, for the West, black people are a distraction a lot of the times.
I teach a course called, you can go to my website, shakaalmos.com. I teach a course called Black Masters, White Slaves. Now, when you hear that title, Black Masters, White Slaves, what comes to mind?
That it's unfortunate that the white people are allowing these blacks to enslave them in their own country.
Okay, well, what
America
would you
was
say?
founded and built by white people, and
Right.
now the radical blacks are enslaving them in their own country.
Okay, so the problem
So it's so difficult to argue with these people. I mean, it's so funny though that he was mentioning that people have to be honest, and he starts off with this lie. That's a great way to start, by the way. But it's remember when I watched that Jubilee debate with the far right? This is just what they do. It doesn't matter if it contradicts something that they already hated or something. And then, of course, they're going to say that it's a joke once you call them out on it, but we'll see.
with that assessment that America was built by white people, if America was built by white people, there would have been no need to go get slaves. So we're going to just dismiss that.
Well, they need some workers, man.
Right. But you say building requires physical activity. So if you're going to say who built what, you have to include those people who made the contribution to
But
the
it wasn't like black people came to America and volunteered to do it.
Well, whether they volunteered or not, they did it.
The white people said
they volunteered or not, they did it.
The white people said to the blacks, "Okay, I need a worker. You looking for a job?"
This guy's trolling is going too far now, to the point where he's going to miss the original topic that was about honesty in between all of these groups. But what he's saying here, again, it brings up something to my mind. We underestimate to some degree how many Africans, and obviously it wasn't anywhere near a large minority. It was almost a very small amount during the slave trade. We underestimate how many of them actually came there as let's say paid laborers or just embassy type people who came from African states. Like, I think a lot of people have no idea that happened, that there were people who literally were free. And I don't mean freed, I mean free. Like they were never enslaved ever, and they still played a role in America. Now, some of them, they didn't want to see their people enslaved, so they stopped participating with American states. By the way, American in quotation marks, a lot of these places were still under European powers.
And the blacks said, "Yes, sir." And so they said, "Okay, the way I'll pay you is that you can live on my land. I will feed you. I will house you. And once in a while, I'll throw in a few bucks so you can buy some."
You're talking about sharecropping. Okay.
Buy
some. That's not slavery. That's sharecropping.
Some wine.
So I understand that.
And so, right. But let me ask you this.
Jesse, before you go on, I want to share something with you.
Wow, that's awesome. Just 3 topics in one moment. No button put on it. No, they didn't neatly wrap it up. They just went through them. And also the worst part is they start off with such a strong, okay, we could go this direction. And then it's like distraction, and then it's over. It fizzles out into nothing.
Briefly, I just want to really put this out there. I'm not one of these young spring chickens, right? So I spent my childhood in the South like you spent your childhood.
How old are you?
In fact, I try not to divulge that. I'm older than I look.
You don't tell your age?
Right? Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. Depends on the mood that I'm in.
Well, he said that he has been in this space for about 30 years. And I know he did not start as a young kid being in it because of his history. So he must, if we start at about 20, then he must be at least 50, which I'm guessing is a little older than that.
Let me share this with you. I'll share this with you. When I was born, Lyndon B. Johnson was president. Okay, so there you go.
So you're like 80.
Okay, there you go. I'm about 85. Okay, so that's my point. So that's why I really enjoy speaking with you, because in many respects I relate to you. And one of the things that a lot of people would probably be disconcerted about when it comes to me, because they see me as Mr. Super Pro Black, Mr. Africa, yeah. And in many contexts I am.
Make sure you clarify that right away, because, by the way, this is not a judgment of this guy as an individual. I'm not doing some judgment thing. If you find something negative about him, okay. If you find something positive, again, okay. I'm just going on the topics that he's bringing up because I think they're very deep topics that they need to be talked about.
But the reality of it is that there are a number of positions that you hold that I actually agree with. So unfortunately, you and I will not be at odds about everything. But I think about some fundamental things, we will certainly definitively be at pure odds.
Amazing.
Yeah, absolutely.
So let me ask: are there black people that look like you that lives in Egypt
Today,
right now?
Oh yeah, Egypt. So yes, of course, there's a lot of black people who in Egypt who live there right now. There's a lot of black people who live pretty much everywhere around the world at this point. So I wonder what the point of this question is.
in Upper Egypt, yes. In Upper Egypt, yes.
But
And probably all over Egypt, but yeah.
but the
in
most
Upper
of the people
Egypt,
that live there and run the country
yes.
are non-looking black. They look more like Allah Akbar people or
You kill me when you say that. Allah Akbar people. Hey, you got to stop for it. I got to share.
To be fair, a lot of the mixed race Egyptians also are let's say the mixed race population in Egypt is one of the most dominant. I mean, there's been the genetic tests of the people today, and most of them are mixed between black and Middle Eastern, and they credit it to slavery. And then at the same time, they will say they shouldn't pay reparations for slavery. But you're saying there was like 30% of slavery. Although there was a book that was talking about that I read that was talking about how there's a group of Nubians which the Egyptians, modern Egyptians, like to have children with and fill their harems, which was a known thing. So the Middle East, the world over, and this is why I say something happened, because the Middle East, the world over, and I'm talking about rich families, they used to like get black people and have children with them at large rates, and those people should be the dominating population in terms of wealth because they inherited it. I don't know where there was a flip. And actually, if you go check, some of those people are in healthy spaces.
Something with you. You do realize that Allah was originally, well, not originally, but at some point in his evolution, Allah was the God of the Christians. You do realize that, right?
No, I don't.
Yeah.
So historically related, the word Allah is related to the word El, which belonged to pagans. Pagans used to have a god, El, and Allah is a version of it. And when Christians, Middle Eastern Christians existed, they applied this name to that. And then the Muslims came and they applied it as well. I think Jews as well did it too. Yes, Jews definitely had a Allah version of their word. So etymology wise, we can see here the etymology of the word Allah has been discussed extensively by classic Arab philologists. The majority of the scholars consider it to be derived from a contraction of the Arabic definitive article al and ilah, deity or God, to Allah, meaning the deity or God, as the contraction of al-ilat to alat. In some sources, the contracted and uncontracted forms are used interchangeably. Originally, ilah was used as an epithet for the West Semitic creator god Ilu, the ergatic version of El. Again, that's the word. El is the original one that is used in many Semitic places before being adopted as the proper name itself for this god. Semitic cognates of Allah appear in Semitic languages such as Aramaic, Ella in the absolute form, and in its definitive emphatic form, Elaha, and so many others. So God as well. I think God is Germanic, and all these other words that exist, they all start in a pre-form. Now, this is where the honesty comes in. Of course, people who are religious don't want to believe that the name of their God comes from some pagan thing. And so obviously there's some pushback from it. But the truth is, whether or not the God exists, a lot of these pagan names would be taken in, especially by people who are converted. Just like how in South Africa, the word Nkulunkulu, which means God, comes from the pagan version of it.
See, that's what I mean. See, people, when you,
I don't know where you get that from.
Well, here's the thing.
Allah hated the Christians.
Jesse, hold on one second. Just hold on one second, okay? You can't teach what you don't know. That's number one.
There's that victim complex. So no, Allah did not hate Christians. In fact, in Islamic tradition, Christians are considered people of the book.
Most people, right. So most people, not just African Americans, most people are historically illiterate. You are historically illiterate. I know that because I listen to you when you speak.
Yeah, I'm slow and black. I'm black and slow.
But it has nothing to do with your color. That's why I said most people are historically.
If I was white, I wouldn't be slow, buddy.
That's
damn, what a stupid thing to say. And the worst part is he's like derailing the guy from an answer that he demanded.
It's not true. There are many, many slow white people.
I never met one.
I know them. Let me share something. I have a lot of white friends. My best friend happens to be white. All right, which is the trope that people use. But my best friend is a white Harvard graduate from
Don't
Maine.
Say that loud, right? Man. You're so into the African thing. Black people are gonna hang you. They're gonna string you up talking about you got a white friend.
No, let me share something with you. Black people who are integrated into themselves, they don't have any issue with white people. They have issues with injustice and they have issues with inequity. And they have issues with black people, like you do. So that's why I don't think that look.
Well, they don't want to hear that part of it because obviously then we're going to come across as really unbiased people who are just trying to make the world a better place. And that's the last thing they want to think about because that's not what they're trying to do, especially not if they're trolling the way he is.
A lot of what you do is it's marketing, it's attention getting, and I get it.
But
right?
I'm not thinking that way though. I'm trying to wake up the people. I want black people to be free again.
But I believe that. But here's the thing though.
Notice how all the trolling went out of the window when he actually pointed it out. Like, this is marketing. This is this and that. He clearly hit the nail right on the head and told him exactly what he was doing. And that's where he couldn't troll. He couldn't, get into his trolling. So he had to go, no, I'm trying to awake people. Now he has to pretend that he's just trying to do good things because, he's being exposed.
You can't, if you are going to cancel out your message by virtue of the way you're delivering it, then you may end up doing more injury than harm. And so you won't accomplish your goal. So I'll give you an example. Walking around wearing t-shirts saying White History Month, but then speaking in a denigrating way about Black History Month, that's going to kill your message. It's going to make you look hypocritical. Nobody wants to listen to a hypocrite. And one of the questions that your producer...
So, of course, what he's saying is absolutely true. People don't just have a reflexive thing to words. It has to do with actions. So if you take the actions of people and you mix them with the words of people, you start to get this mixture of, should I listen to this person or not? But the way he's saying it as if Jesse doesn't know this. A lot of these people, they want to live in a state where nothing happens, where they can keep saying the same thing over and over again and nothing happens. And the way to do that is to have contradictory messages so that nothing happens, where people can see an enemy on the other side, but not see enough solutions where they think it's surmountable. And so all you get is, this constant fighting, almost like two hands pressing on each other, the immovable object and, the unstoppable force.
Said I would be asked was, what was my history with Christianity? I grew up in a church. I was a Christian. Yeah. There was a period in my life where I did accept Jesus Christ.
But let me tell you, I want to get to that, but I'm looking at the clock and I want to get to that. I have so many questions for you. About the discussion that white and black people want to have. White people want to have a discussion with blacks about slavery, about this phony idea of racism and everything.
No, they do not an honest one, because that would put them in a position where they would have to admit that they have done the wrong. Let's be honest. In that situation, it's just the clean sweep. That is why they do not want to engage in that conversation, because there is nothing they can do to clean their image. in that point of view. And the opportunity they used to have and they did use, which was lying about history. I mean, in South Africa, they covered it up. Like, a lot of people don't associate South Africa with slavery. And the reason for that is because it was covered up by the government. And it's not something that is talked about as much as it should be. The fact that South Africa had a large amount of slaves, and then after that had apartheid, where they basically had wage slaves, where they paid them almost nothing.
But black people are so hooked on this idea of racism that
Right.
once you try to tell them the truth, they're going
Right.
to use the word racism, and the whole discussion is over, because white people know that they're not responsible for the condition of blacks. Blacks
Well, they're not responsible for the conditions of black people, but they're responsible for the history that affects their conditions today. Everybody's condition can be affected by themselves, especially if you give it your all and all of that. But no one is saying that they're like, because that would still put them in the role where they basically hold the key to people's lives. But in real life, people are dominating their own lives today, and that upsets a lot of them, which is why there's still, like I said, there's some comments that I want to go check in other videos. Like, if you go watch African documentaries about African stuff, there's always a bunch of white supremacists there talking about, oh, look how bad this place is.
are responsible for their own condition, and white people want to say that,
Right.
but they know there's not a legitimate discussion. A legitimate discussion will happen because blacks are so hateful toward white people, and they have been getting away with this word for racism forever now. And so the white people don't even.
Jesse, I gotta
because
stop you.
white
One thing
people
I'm not
who
gonna
are
do-
alive
Jesse,
today
Jesse,
have nothing to do
Jesse,
with
the
black.
one thing I'm not
Hold on,
going to
let
do,
me just
Jesse.
finish that.
Go
White
ahead.
people who are alive today has nothing to do with the condition of the blacks.
Right.
And so blacks are unwilling to have a fair and real discussion.
Okay. So here's the problem. There is inequity in your conversation. You keep speaking about how hateful black people are towards white people.
Yes.
And the issue with
Well, unfortunately, he's dragged you into the swamps of the conversation. You started off with a great question. How come there are, or how many black people are there in Egypt today? And then somehow that went to the typical conversation of just race and how could we could all get together and hug one another, which is like, you can't get to the meat of anything, especially history, because they always want to drag it to the swamps. Let's go into the dark areas of the conversation.
that is that you are basically advancing an image that is it belies the actual facts. And the actual facts is that the hatred is mutual. It's not one way. It's a mutual
No.
dislike and hatred. It certainly is.
No, it's not.
It abs-
So I agree with Jesse Lee Peterson here that the hatred is not mutual. White people hate black people far more and for less reason. I could understand why black people could hate white people today. I mean, if you do that slavery thing, the westernizing thing, all of that, there's a understanding for it. Obviously, it's probably not a good thing, but there's an understanding for it. White people, what did black people do to white people that would make them hate them?
It's really not.
It is. But here's the thing: it's
It's
unfair.
really not.
It is. I know that it is because I
No,
live in America. I live in the same country you live in.
It's really not. It's an illusion
It
to
is.
think
It
that.
certainly is. No, here it is. If you make a conscious choice not to see it, so here's the thing.
No,
Right?
I can see what's going on, man.
No. Okay, Jesse. Here's the thing. The hatred is mutual. It doesn't require for you to agree with it. It doesn't require for anyone on your staff to agree with it. The hatred is mutual. That is, and by depicting it as being one way, you are going to be part of the problem and not part of the solution.
The hatred is definitely not mutual because one is cultural while the other one is choice based. A lot of black people that choose to hate white people, a lot of it is choice based. If you go and see especially black people who are in areas where there are white people. A lot of those black people, they quickly integrate with the white population. Do the other way around. White populations in black spaces. Yeah, if there's enough of them, they'll enclave themselves so fast.
rather than saying, hey, look, here's a list of reasons why, or here's a list of grievances from both sides. Here's a list of grievances from white people, why they strongly dislike black people. Here's a list of grievances from black people, why they strongly dislike white people.
But
and then you sit down, and you have an honest discussion about it. The point that I'm making to you and to your show and to your audience is that no one on either side is prepared to have a real conversation about race.
In all honesty, what he's saying does have a touch of truth, that we all are aware there's a little bit of bias inside of all of us, but the touch of truth part does not overwhelm the fact that in this exchange, when it comes to race, black people have a much higher, let's say, moral thing to stand on, so they're more likely to come with truth, whereas the other side has to come a lot more with lies in order to cover up for a lot of the atrocities.
And here's the thing, you cannot have that race.
white people want to have a real conversation.
Hold on. You cannot have that discussion divorced from history. It is impossible.
No, it's not. What the?
You cannot have that discussion divorced from history. And I'll tell you why. Because people are walking around with racial illusions and racial delusions in their mind. That includes you. That includes your staff.
No.
That includes people that follow me.
Well, of course, if you remove history and then you just come from the context of why do we hate each other or why do they hate us more, then obviously you're going to be like, well, if I'm not allowed to use history, then I can give some modern examples, and you could probably throw some modern examples, and then there'll be no context between the two. Whereas if you take context wise, then you will see the truth easily. That is why obviously he wants to remove history.
1 second. That includes people that follow me. That includes people that follow people like Farrakhan and everyone else. When you are historically illiterate, everybody in the room, and that's what it comes down to. It takes people who actually know history to put people on the same page. So that's when you need that. So that's when you need to start asking the right questions.
Let me ask you this.
What did you, hold on, Jesse, you said a moment ago, you said that the people in Egypt today don't look black, right?
Jesus Christ. 1 hour later, they're going to go back to that. This is because of the distractions. And again, this is how most of these honest conversations would go. It would just be one guy talking. Usually, this is usually the conversation of people when they come together, how it goes. Usually you'll have two honest people who will usually agree on everything if they're both two honest people. One honest person and a liar, which means they might agree on everything, just not in an honest way. And then you'll have two liars who, again, might agree on stuff, but not on the stuff that matters, because they're both liars and they're just playing the game. The only way to get a full discussion, the only way is to make sure, one, first of all, you get people who are telling the truth. Secondly, evidence. Without evidence, it doesn't even matter. And evidence comes from history. And then you need, solutions that are steps to solutions that are going to be in place. And if you don't do that, then all of it doesn't matter. The discussion is just for play.
Right.
So let me ask you
the
a
ones
question.
that are ruling Egypt.
Right.
And
So-
yes, you
so let
do
me ask
have
you.
some black looking folks live over there, but they ain't doing nothing.
Well, let
They're
me
just
ask you a
sitting back
question.
looking at the Egyptians making the country great at the same.
So, of course, the narrative shifts now. He says they look at the Egyptians, which he means the Middle Easterners, which before he called them the Allahu Akbar people, which tells you how much he doesn't like them. But what's interesting is now he's like, they're making the country great, making Egypt great. But he doesn't think Egypt is great. he definitely doesn't, because I've heard him talk about Egypt and say, one, they don't have certain rights, which is actually true. There's certain rights that they don't have. And there's a lot of things that they don't have that's not, wouldn't be ideal. But now he's like, oh, it's a great country because anything that goes against black people is great for a lot of the people. This is where the trolling goes.
Hey, what the blacks are doing over here, man.
But the blacks in Egypt are Egyptians. So when you say the Egyptians, you're saying the Egyptians are making the country look great.
The one that don't look like y'all.
You mean the one that don't look like us?
Yeah,
what about
you guys.
The ones that don't look like us?
What?
What about the ones that don't look like us?
They're the one making Egypt great. They're
Okay,
the one
so
that
I'm asking you. So I'm asking you a question. My question to you is, why is it that those people who are
they're the ones controlling the country. I don't know if they're making it great. Well, I wouldn't say Egypt is not a good country. It's definitely okay, especially by African standards, but modern African standards. But when you conquer an area in the Islamic age, then you get to run it. That's just how it works. Just like how white people ran America for the longest time because they conquered the area, doesn't mean they're native to the land.
Running the country in Egypt, why is it that they don't look like us?
Because they are the original Egyptian.
And that's where you're wrong. That's what I mean.
But let me tell you, I gotta move on. No.
Okay, 1 second before you move on. I don't want you to give your audience misinformation. You just said that they're the original one.
I've seen them before. I know Egyptians.
You got it backwards. They are not the original ones. They are descendants of those who are not the people who created the state of Egypt.
So they're lying too?
Yes, they are.
So the white people lying, the Egyptians lying, the Jews are lying. Everybody that's doing great are lying about the blacks.
So if you say the statement like that, it does sound a little bit weird until you start considering. Let's just use the groups that he's using. So the Egyptians are lying. Well, they have incentive to lie. Why wouldn't they lie? And then he said the Israelis are lying, and some of them definitely are, the ones who claim specific parts of lands. I mean, it's not like everybody that is part of the list that he's talking about are so, used to giving true statements when it comes to original people of specific lands. And we don't even need to get into Europeans.
But that's the way history works.
So why blacks don't do better if they're so smart?
Right.
And they believe they're ahead of everything? Why don't we see them doing better? They're destroying. They're not building anything.
Again, this is just I forgot what it's called, but when snow comes down a mountain, like in a hurricane type of way, this is what's basically happening right here. He's saying a whole bunch of nonsense at once, and it's overwhelming the other guy. So he said, why are black people not building anything? Which obviously black people are building a whole bunch of stuff all over the world. They're trying to rebuild a continent which was destroyed, while taking into consideration that there's going to be bad people who are going to try to still drag us into that past. And then we still have Western competition, or Western people trying to compete by dominating those lands. So saying black people aren't doing anything is stupid. And then, of course, our contributions internationally. And then we have the historical ones. So that's why it's overwhelming him, because there's so much information that you to give that you just get stuck.
Well,
1
second. Hold on 1 second. This is not an aha moment. First of all, you say that they're not building anything.
They're destroying. Look what they're doing to America. Look what they're doing to Egypt and everywhere.
Let me ask you a question.
Again, this guy has no idea what black people in Egypt are doing. And when he gets called out on it, he will 100% pull back.
Blacks in Egypt are destroying Egypt?
Yeah, meaning that they ain't doing nothing over there. Just sitting back looking at the Egyptians working hard and doing.
So I pointed it out many times, but I have to do it again because otherwise some people might not notice it. So notice how he was like, oh, they're destroying. And then when the guy called him out and he was going to ask him, give an example, he was like, oh, I can't think of anything. So he goes generic and says, they're not building anything. They're just sitting back watching the other Egyptians. Of course, if you start listing a number of black people in Egypt who are contributing to the country, at that point he's going to have to throw another generic thing.
That thing. Why
All right.
aren't blacks doing better if they're so smart?
You said, why aren't blacks doing better if they're so smart?
Yes.
Okay. Doing better by whose terms and whose standards?
By their own turn, or by the country that they live in, or by other people.
Right.
They just build ghettos and they get in it, they destroy white people, good
Okay,
stuff.
hold on 1 second.
So of course everything that he's saying is easy to defend against, so I should just let him go after it, because I think I've been giving my opinion for too long now.
You said black people build ghettos?
Yeah.
I've never seen a black person build a ghetto.
Well, you've been in
That's something I
Africa too
haven't
long
seen.
now. You need to
I've been
look
where?
around.
No, hold on.
Look what they just did to the country. They burned down buildings. They destroyed businesses. They
You know something?
killed
I
cops.
want to say something.
They-
You had a guest on. 1 second. You had a guest on the other day. And I don't know if it was the other day, because I watched your show, a few of them, just to get
Right.
to know you a little bit better. I didn't want to prejudge you. And one of your guests was a Jewish professor who grew up in Lebanon. And I really enjoyed the interview. But the one thing that I noticed about the interview is that you interact differently with different guests.
So answers on the board. Guess which guests he treats better than other guests.
You afforded him a certain level of respect and a certain level of deference that I don't see you give to other guests. Other guests you don't take seriously. You will insult their intelligence, and you'll basically disrespect the discourse. And I think that that's unfair, right? And so I think that the same type of respect that you afforded him and that you extended to him, I think that you should extend that to all your guests, because your audience will be the richer for it. You allowed him a graceful measure of time in which to respond to your questions so that people could really be informed. So
let's be honest. The answer to that question is it probably was some religious idea that he agrees with, or it was some racial thing that he agrees with, because that's how he sort of moves as a human being. And then when he disagrees, he's not going to allow you to talk. Instead, he's going to gish gallop, I guess that's the word, where you overwhelm the conversation in order for the other people not to hear the other points.
he described the experience of the Jews in Lebanon and how they were at a disadvantage because of their numbers, right? And so if you look at
But you
black
know what it
people in
is? Some
America-
people go like they talk too long and I'm running out of time.
okay, no, I respect that. I
And
respect
so
that. But
it's
if you
not-
look
but
at
I
the black
feel the
people in
same-
America,
But I have no resentment or anger toward any of my guests or anyone, right?
That's not even close to true, because if he agrees with someone, he's going to let him go for a very long time. I can't really give examples of that because I don't want to sit here and watch why those type of people give out their opinions. I'm okay with him saying whatever he wants because it's always generic nonsense. It never gets into the deepest propaganda levels.
And so
Okay.
it's just you deal with different personalities and
okay.
you have different
Okay, I can
conversations.
respect that. I can respect that. I
Yeah.
can respect that. So with my personality, if you ask me a question, what I want to do is I want to try to be the reason I don't rush to answers, especially when somebody's asking me a question like what you asked me about black people, why aren't we doing better?
Right.
Right? The reason I don't rush to the answer, and you notice your first initial reaction because I said was aha. The reason I hesitated is because when I answer questions like that, I want to be as responsible as possible. I don't want to just say the first thing that comes out of my
But
mind.
don't take too
Because the
long
first thing-
because
okay,
time
no, I
goes by.
respect that.
Yeah, time. That thing called time. That's why you interrupt the conversation and go in 100 directions, because of the respect of time. Don't respect that. He's lying. It's not because of time. It's simply because he doesn't want to hear specific ideas. He doesn't want his audience to hear specific ideas, because a lot of them do eventually, when they realize like they've been wasting their time, go elsewhere. And a lot of his audience watch it. What's the word I'm looking for? like a comedy or something. They don't watch it seriously.
No, I respect that. The if you say the first thing that comes to your mind, there's a really good chance that you may be wrong and you may answer emotionally, and it may be a reactionary answer as
So what
opposed
was
to
the
a
first
well-thought
thing
answer.
came to your mind when I asked, why don't, if they so smart, the blacks, why don't they do better?
I think honestly, it's a combination of a number of things. It's not just any one thing. I think it's a combination of a number of things.
What's the
One-
primary thing?
Well, to be honest, if you take the colonized places of the world that eventually got free, Africa and places with black people, especially America and England and some places like that, they're actually doing pretty well compared to other places where there was also colonization. Now, obviously, if you compare them to the places that were colonizing, and so they got all the fruits of that time, especially the modern world where it was easier to grab more. You know, a lot of people, they like to do that thing of like, everybody did this. It's like there's a difference between doing it now and doing it back then. Like if somebody was trying to get rid of a large population in the past, it would be much harder with bow and arrows and spears and stuff. Whereas today, it's much easier. There's a difference.
What's the primary
Uh,
reason?
I think the primary thing is I want to say hold on. I want to say instinctively, I want to say racism.
Yep.
Okay, instinctively, but
Which is the correct answer.
there is a part of my mind that is historically informed, and I would say that it has to do with certain things about ourselves that we have not yet confronted. And that's why I said earlier, neither side wants to have an honest conversation. There's certain things about Black history and African history that Black people will refuse to talk about.
Well, there's definitely stuff that they would refuse, but these things are nothing in comparison to the one you mentioned first, racism. Now, of course, what he is talking about, the refusing part, would be groups within the black, not the whole group, groups within. This would be something different. This is interracial fighting, not interracial, intra-racial. So within the races, within the race of black people. So, you know, where you have one group going after another or whatever, and then when it's over, then they don't want to talk about it anymore and stuff like that. But that's something different, and it doesn't really contribute that much as racism does. And again, it's not just, oh, there's racism, you can't do anything. Africa and the other parts, the diaspora, is rising.
They will, because it doesn't make us look good, right? And so it's a lot easier to say white people, white people, white people, white people, white people. And I'm saying, wait a minute. I'm not saying that white people have not played a part in our dysfunction.
It's not, it's, for me, it's not even white people. It's obviously there would be the people element of it, but it's these things they set up, like the versions of capitalism that targeted specific groups, versions of slavery, versions of institutions. Then, of course, you can add that it comes from multiple sources and multiple people from around the world. They learn from them that Africa is a continent to exploit. We're talking about multiple people from around the world copied their thing, maybe not with the same racial side of it, but still coming in the same way.
But until you are willing to have an honest conversation about our own history, divorced from white people, our own, before white people even showed up, we had certain issues. And until we discuss that, those issues are going to continue to plague us, and they are going to continue to play out, whether it's white people that are dominating us, whether it's Asian people that are dominating us, or whether it's Latin people that are dominating us. You first have to get your own historical house in order.
Each
And
individual.
These are three different subjects that he's talking about. So at the individual level, obviously you can't say the system is crushing on me, so I'm going to do nothing. And obviously, as a racial thing or as an ethnic group, which is going to be a smaller thing, if you're American, you have to deal with it from an American point of view. If you're South African, South African. If you're Zimbabwean, Zimbabwean. But you're going to have to deal with it from that point of view. But that's different than a racial problem. The racial problem is a racial problem. It's not something that can be dealt with by looking at your history, because we don't all share the same history necessarily. Obviously, someone who's from a specific tribe is going to have a completely different history than someone else.
This Nile movement.
The Nile Valley movement, yes.
Yeah, the Nile Valley movement.
Yes, sir.
Are white people allowed to be a part of this Nile Valley movement?
I would think in an ancillary way, sure.
They are part of it? Are they a part of it, or is it just blacks?
In an ancillary way, yes. In a supportive and an ancillary way, yeah, sure.
What do you mean by supportive ancillary way?
It's like
that's hilarious. He said in a supportive and silly way. He did not silly, he said insulary, which means isolated way, or in an island type of way, or a basically an island type of way.
It's like in any other institution. Different people have different roles to play, right? And so like you just said before, if you look at the government in Egypt, right, and you said there are no black people in that government, right? So you have to ask yourself, is it because of exclusionary policies, right? And exclusionary policies don't always have to be explicit. Sometimes they can just be implicit, right?
So can they be a member?
Yes, that's definitely the reason, by the way. The fact that it is in that type of way, 100%.
Of the Nile Valley movement.
In an ancillary?
No. Can they come and join the movement?
In an ancillary and in a supportive way, yes.
And so the blacks who joined, are they in an ancillary and whatever move?
Certain ones, yeah.
He's trying to avoid the fact that he's trying to say that some of the people have to stay somewhat on the outside so that we can keep it for the people that it was built for, so that they can have an understanding. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that.
Yes.
Okay. Let me ask you this. You were, your religion is called the Kemetic religion? Kemetic or something like that? What's that?
I don't particularly have a religion. So let me just put that out there.
What is, I want to make sure I'm pronouncing this word clearly.
Kemetic.
And so what is that religion?
Okay. So
that's your religion, right?
I don't subscribe really to any particular religion. So,
but I'm saying what you're doing is called the Kemetic.
Hold on.
The guy can't even say anything at this point. He's just like, okay, well, I guess I have to. Yeah, he can't say anything. By the way, the ancient Egyptian religion, even though it's got a name, for the most part, it's animism, the same as every other religion in Africa. And if someone chooses to practice animism, the easiest way to connect to ancient Egyptian animism without just going pure out of lecture and reading scriptures is to go to Africa today and find people who still practice animism, especially in a very African way. A good one would be going to Sudan and places like that, and then finding how they practice it, how they relate human-like people to animals, and or what's it called again? To be automated or whatever, to be able to move, and how it's related to inanimate animated people and inanimate objects, and how some of these are given life and stuff like that. And that would be the best way to practice the religion, and in a non-academic, sort of wasted time type of way. It's like if you consider the difference between academic Christianity, which is sort of stale, versus like the Christianity performed by people who just believe it on the streets.
Hold on. There are some people who characterize the spiritual practices of ancient Egypt as Kemetic religion.
What does Kemetic
Okay.
mean?
Kemetic is a reference to the original name of the country of Egypt.
Oh,
The people who lived in Egypt did not call it Egypt; they called it Kemet, which means the black land. Okay, so they also called it Tameri, the beloved land, and they called it Tawi, the two land.
so why
But
you're not? Since you started this stuff over here, why you're not a Kemetic religion person?
um,
Probably because he's not forced to. You have a choice to join a religion. You don't have to join it just because it existed. Of course, it is probably a smart idea to worship things that are much earlier than others. But again, you have to re-look at religions around the world so you can see where interpretations come from and stuff like that.
Make it sound bad.
I'm sorry.
You act like it's a bad thing.
Act like what's a bad thing? That
Kemetic
Kemetic
religion.
is a bad thing. I just think that most people who practice it misunderstand it because they're not really historically informed.
And so
So
that's
they-
why you're not a part of it?
Probably so. Yeah.
So if
I'm
they
not,
don't understand it, why don't you be a part to help them understand it?
it's just simply I'm just a solo kind of person. I
Oh.
just try not to. I try to travel light.
By the way, it's not the fault of the people who try to practice ancient Egyptian religion that they get it wrong, which of course it's a very complicated thing. Even the Egyptians themselves did not agree on how to practice the religion, which is why it's, a lot of people are getting it wrong because they think there's one way to practice the religion. But look at Christianity today. Is there one way of practicing it? Look at Islam. Look at the Judeo religions. Is there one way of practicing that? And that's a much shorter time than the ancient Egyptian religion existed. And you found many different sections of the religion anyway. And a lot of it was by design. Even their thinking of it was, this god is more towards this area or cared more about these people in particular. And a lot of it is connected to land specifically. So if it's connected to land, you can't really just practice it from wherever at the same time. Like if you're trying to protect yourself from the Nile hippo, right? That's part of the religion. It's very difficult to do that in another country.
It makes my journey that much more manageable. Rather than bog myself down by other people's ignorance.
Do you, at one time, you were a Christian. You were raised a
Yes.
Christian. Your
Yes.
parents were Christians?
I would say my mother was, yes.
Were you raised by your father and mother?
Technically speaking, yes.
Were they together, husband and wife?
Yes, they were.
And so
it
who were
was a
you
nuclear
close?
family.
I'm sorry?
It was a nuclear family.
Who were you closer to, your mother or your father?
This is getting extremely personal. Why does he care about this information? So I just speed ran through the rest of it, and most of it is just talking about his personal life. There is another part that I'll put up of a small bit that they talk about when they get back to Egypt, but that's for tomorrow or something.